However, I must say, that's actually reasonably right based on a gazillion studies. If you want, the concept there, if he gave a regular boring talk like a lecture in class as opposed to the talks he gives where he gets paid $2,000 a person and 10,000 people show up, the concept there is that motivation is not just driven by some biological needs, but essentially is significantly in your control. And the second concept there is that it's significantly in your control through a psychological process called goal setting. Since we all use the word goals, this does not even have to be defined. But the concept of goal setting is to have some specific image in mind of some future state that isn't realized yet, that you could get to, a goal. There's no special definition. There is a rather large literature on this. What I put up is a rectangle that has some words on it, but is the cover of a book that reviews literally hundreds of studies on goal setting and achievement and performance, often, again, for any of you interested in making more money than you might be being stuck in a college, often in business settings. This is a standard management by objectives kind of thing in business settings. The big variable, and this is why I cut the audio when I did, because it's exactly where Tony Robbins said this too, like he's quite familiar with this, is specificity of goals. In other words, there are many times, and you find yourself in college like this a lot, where 2 months before some large paper is due, and frankly it gets worse after freshman year, at some point you'll have some senior project, and the project goal will be, well, think of a good idea for the thesis. Think of a good idea is so unspecific that if you go to the library and spend some time trying to think of a good idea, you really have no idea if you've made any progress, because you can't tell if the ideas are any good yet, because the paper is written 2 months from now, and you can't find out if they're good, and the professor doesn't tell you if they're good, because he can't tell or she can't tell either. Sometimes you're working in settings where it's kind of unclear what you're supposed to do, and people tell you stuff like, well, do your best. In other settings, though, it's possible to identify some specific thing that you're trying to do, where specific means as specific as you're training for the marathon. That means if it's 9 weeks away, you have to run X miles this week, and you've got a chart, and you're plotting miles per week, and you've got a book that says how many miles to run, so you're sure it's right, and you have absolutely can't-fail feedback on progress towards some super specific goal. Those things intuitively seem like they're more motivating, meaning that you actually get something done, more so than, well, I'm supposed to think of a topic for a paper someday. Goals vary in specificity, and this can be studied experimentally. This is, it's going to happen twice in this class. This is one of those where that person's name looks like mine. This is something I did ages ago, and it's still, it holds up. I mean, it's not completely insane for me to mention this. It's not like 10 other people showed it doesn't work, and I'm not mentioning that. Way back when, the previous century, we ran this study to test specifically the sort of stuff Tony Robbins was talking about. I suspect if we dragged him in here, he would actually be familiar with this, since he, of course, is giving his talk far after we ran this kind of study, and he had the presence of mind to give talks and make a fortune, whereas we just ran the study. To run a study on the effect of goal setting, you want people to do something that's hard. One of the ways to do that is to give them like an intelligence test, but then the hardness is confounded with, there's two factors, motivation and their just level of intellectual ability on the test. So the other thing to do is to give them people something that's hard, that has no intellectual component at all. So people do something physically tiring. Oh no, why did I do this with a PowerPoint? They ride on an exercise bicycle, which of course shouldn't be moving since it's stationary. And it's some kind of weird, new at the time, now it's more common, exercise bicycle that's, at the time the study was run, was not commonly in any gym or something. So it was plausible to create a cover story in which we told people that this was a specialized device that was going to be used in medical settings to gauge recovery. And these sort of things are used in medical settings to gauge recovery. if you had recovery from a kind of a mild heart attack, people will put you on some kinds of treadmill things while you're doing they're monitoring oxygen consumption to see how you're doing. So it was a viable cover story. Everybody is told that this is an important thing to do. It's a big deal cover story. We're collecting baseline data from healthy people. The people in the medical school are going to use the baseline data for comparison purposes with people who've had an injury or illness. Everybody's told that we're interested in their ability to maintain their performance over time and not just get tired out, in fact, to potentially increase performance over time. But some people are given this mundane little thing. They're told to please try to increase their performance a specific amount. Since everybody's told to try to do the best they could conceivably do, just telling people to increase a specific amount doesn't seem to add to much. Imagine somebody giving a wild pep talk before a football game and then say, and try to complete 7 first downs in the first half. It would seem boring, but it may not be a bad thing to do. And some people get feedback on exactly how well they're doing, which is critical here, as it turns out. So when the graph goes up, a control condition means they were just told to do your best, and then the other conditions get goals or feedback or not. What happens in this sort of thing, thank heavens there's one more bar here, otherwise it wouldn't be much of an experiment. What happens is over the course of these trials, there's so much motivational stuff that says to do your best that people tend to increase across time in how they're doing. You can measure precisely the physical output on these devices, of course. However, if in addition to telling people, do your best, my God, go get them, you give them some specific, easily attainable challenge and some feedback on how they're doing, whoops, went the wrong way. You essentially double their performance, and this is not unique to this study. This kind of study gets replicated all over the place, including very applied settings, literally as applied as at FedEx, they want to increase the speed with which the people put the boxes on the plane. For 2 years, they've been saying, hurry it up, put those boxes, will you? But then simple manipulations like X number of boxes per minute, and a guy holding up a little sign that says, oh, you've done it, is way the heck better than just telling people to try your best. That was actually the Tony Robbins lesson, and in the midst of all the craziness that, if you see these videos, is a Tony Robbins thing, who sometimes has people walk on fire and do all this other crazy stuff. It's probably the case that he could have people doing hardly any of that and just have them set these really specific life goals. If you ask why this happens, oh, good, there's time for this. It's actually known. I'm going to spare you the details of this study. What happens, I suspect Tony Robbins could tell you this too, is that if you have a specific goal for running, like you're on a track and you can see how far you're going, obviously you're kind of younger than whatever, that's you, and you have a stopwatch, if you're trying to get a particular time and there's a timer and you know exactly what you're doing, this triggers certain types of thinking. So what happens is setting specific goals triggers, and we know this from other measures in this study, certain types of thinking in which people think about themselves, wonder how well they can do, become dissatisfied with themselves if they've fallen short. Whereas if you imagine yourself running, but you're not wearing a watch and you're just running, it's possible to just sort of space out and wonder what to do for your paper assignment or where to go on the weekend or something. And then you don't have, what happens is, in essence, is that the phenomenon is a lot of thinking processes controlling motivation, and the sort of goal-setting thing Tony Robbins went through creates a world in which you realize I can do better, you're paying attention to how you're doing, you try to speed up, you feel proud if you do something, and if you're just running around in circles, it's hard to feel dissatisfied or proud without a stopwatch. And it's these thinking processes that run a lot of the game of motivation. And a lot of it is providing this feedback, which is, of course, why these companies are doing pretty well. I don't know how many people are wearing one of these, but this is, well, whatever. The Fitbit is still selling a lot of these Fitbits. And it's exactly designed to increase motivation through the ways this research said, so you can see, oh, look, I took 8,000 steps already.